just tell us what happened to you, Sarah.
Well, my near-death experience happened in 1989. I was bicycling home from a volunteer position, and I got hit by a pickup truck from behind, traveling at about 50 miles an hour. Truck slammed into me, and I was catapulted 60 feet forward. My lungs collapsed. Most of my internal organs ruptured. I broke my pelvis. I was pretty much roadkill at that point.
Roadkill?
Yeah. Fortunately, there was a police officer nearby who radioed an ambulance, and I was taken to a hospital rather quickly. But
were you off on the side of the road or going?
No, I was in the bike lane, actually.
In the bike lane?
Yeah, the woman was racing for a light, and she didn't see me.
Oh, my God.
Yes.
And you got thrown 60 feet with just about everything internally ruptured.
Oh, it was bad.
You know?
Yeah.
So they 911, ambulance comes.
Right. Of course, I don't have any memory of any of that, though. That information was all told to me afterwards.
You were out cold.
Yeah. And I was having my NDE at that point, as far as I can tell.
Well, all right. Is there any here? Okay. I'd like to understand from that moment that you got hit. Obviously, you didn't have any warning that you were about to be hit, did you?
No,
really?
none at all. In
None
fact,
at all.
I've never even seen the face of the woman that hit me.
Wow. So just bang.
Yeah.
And that's it. All right. So what is your first recollection? Your first recollection?
The first thing that I remember was being in a very complete, utterly black place. I didn't have any sense of up or down or direction or perspective. It was just as black as you can imagine. And in this place, I had an awareness that I still had a body, but other than that, I had no idea where I was or what was happening next at all. You know, I was just kind of stunned.
Was there any sense of the real world? The Sarah was
no,
no. You didn't rise up and see your body and all that stuff.
No, it was as if I was in a black box, except there were no walls. I couldn't see anything anywhere. There was nothing but black. And it was very black too. You know, they described velvet black.
I understand. And you still had a sense that your body was there?
That I still had a body, yes.
Well, the first thing I would do if I had that kind of consciousness, I guess I would, even in the black, to retain my sanity, I would try and touch myself and feel my hands and my arms and my body to see if I really was physical.
Well, I don't remember doing anything like that. All I remember is that I had an awareness of kind of arms and legs, you know, that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was there for an unknown length of time where nothing happened. I was just in this black place.
Did you have emotions? Were you terrified?
I was stunned more than anything else. It was just kind of actually kind of a neutral feeling more than anything else. But it quickly changed.
A neutral feeling?
Yeah. Kind of, okay, where am I, and why am I here, and why is it that there's nothing here but me?
Right. No sense of anything else, any other presence, beings, or...
Nothing at all.
Wow.
Just dark.
But you say that changed.
Yes. At one point, off in what seemed to be the distance, because it was farther away from me, I started hearing a hum. And then I saw a little pinprick of light. And the sound began to get louder, and it got closer to me. And as the whatever it was drew closer, I noticed that it was a creature, and that the creature was surrounded by flames in all the various colors of flames, reds and yellows, and it was, I don't know, big. Like, it seemed like it was 8 feet tall to me, and it was huge. And it had huge teeth and huge eyes, and it was, there was the humming all around it, and it was making, you know, it was growling and gnashing its teeth, and it was drooling. And from what I remember, the body of the creature itself was black, and it just was coming toward me at an incredible rate. And
you discerned this black against the white because you had been in total blackness, right?
Right. Well, against the flames, it was completely covered with flames.
Brother.
Flames were shooting out of it. It had like a huge, not like a halo, but more like it was surrounded by flames that shot out from its body.
How old were you when this occurred?
27.
All right, so here comes a creature that looks, what, like a dragon, or is there any way to describe?
The closest thing that I could say is that it looked a demon, really, more than a dragon.
A demon?
A demon. It was very demonic, yeah. It had a huge gnashing teeth, and it had long, scaly hands, and it was, it was stomping up and down, and huge eyes. I guess it was draconic in aspect, but not like you would think of a dragon. It didn't have wings or anything like that, although it did have flames. But the flames weren't coming out of its nose or anything like that. It was just surrounding it.
Huh. And so, how intellectually awake were you?
I was terrified at that point. I don't know. There's no other way to describe it. I was awed and terrified at whatever this was that was coming at me.
So you had enough sense about you to have the hell scared out of you.
Oh, I was utterly, I was frozen in fear.
I mean, this sounds like something out of the movie Alien. You know, that horrid little creature.
Yeah,
big
but
creature,
it was,
actually.
Except it was big, and it was flaming too. It wasn't just slobbering. And it was looking at me. Do you know what I mean? It had intent that was on me.
You, yes.
Yes, it was coming for me.
Oh.
Yes.
My. Did you at all? I mean, I'm sure you just had raw fear, so you didn't have time to intellectualize. But at some point, you must have wondered: am I dead? Have I gone into another dimension? Have I time slipped? Something or another. Did you think about any of that? In other words, why you were here, where you were, all of that?
Only before the creature started coming toward me did I think about anything like that. Once I realized that this was something that was coming toward me and had an intention of dealing with me, there was nothing but terror in my mind, and I was just in awe because I'd never seen anything like this ever. It was so fantastic, so much beyond the realm of anything in ordinary reality, especially because there was nothing else around it to compare it to. It's just black and this thing.
Okay. When I first called, I think a man answered. Was that your husband?
Yeah.
Do you have children?
Yes, I do.
You do? Mm-hmm. Have you led a reasonably good life, do you think?
Well, when this happened, which was now 10 years ago, it took me that long, as Jeff was saying for him, it took me about 10 years before I was really able to talk about this to anybody else.
Sure.
I had really led a very ordinary life. I hadn't really lived very long and done very much. You know what I mean? In terms of...
Yes, I do.
I didn't really have time to really create too much havoc. I felt that I really had led a rather ordinary life in most aspects, up until that point,
Yeah.
That was another thing that seems and continues to seem fantastic to me.
I mean, you sound articulate. You sound like a housewife. You sound pretty normal to me.
Oh, I am. I listen to you, so I don't know.
Well, all right. Well, I might put you out there a notch or so.
Okay, you're not that normal then.
Well, I would consider myself to be a little bit, outside of the norm. But in terms of the way I relate to the world, I hold a job, I pay my taxes, all that stuff.
So here comes this
creature.
Demon, I guess. Demon.
Well, that's the way I look at it, yeah. It was...
Oh, there is one more thing I need to ask you, and that is, so we can put this in perspective, your religious background.
Oh, I was raised an Episcopalian.
Strict?
No.
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 So...
Which is a really rather gentle sect, as far as the sects go, I think.
Gotcha. All right.
Can I ask you one thing, Sarah?
Sure.
Didn't you tell us at the Friends of Ions group that I have on Sundays that you were coming back from a volunteer job at the church?
Yes.
And you were on your way home from the church.
Yes, I was.
On your bike when you got hit by a hit-and-run driver.
Yes. In fact, I was getting ready to getting ready to do a job as a deaconess at the church the very next day. And I was coming home happy when this happened to me.
So
I was on top of the world at that point.
So not only were you doing something for the church, but you felt good about yourself?
Oh, I was very happy at that point, yes. And I was on my bicycle, And, I wasn't in a car, and I was very happy about that because it was a lovely country road that I was riding on. And it was a beautiful evening. It really caught me by surprise and turned me upside down, literally, and everything after that, too.
Also, Art, I might mention that Sarah is carrying a lot of the physical scars of that experience, too. Sarah, isn't it your right arm that's pretty much paralyzed?
Yeah, I lost the use of my right arm as a result of the injuries from the accident afterwards.
How about the rest of you? I mean, collapsed lungs, internal organs?
It took a long time before I could walk, and I suffered from a concussion also, so I had a complete loss of identity. I had to teach myself to read.
My God.
Again, and all those normal things that happen when you get a really, really serious injury like that.
Amnesia?
Oh, yeah. It took a long time for me to become who I am now.
You had to actually learn to read again?
Yes, I did. I couldn't read. I started with kids' books like, Go Spot Go. And I remember it being a big achievement for me when I could read People magazine. And then I went on from there because before the accident, I'd been and still am a very avid reader. I love to read. And the fact that had been taken away from me was almost too much for me to bear.
Did parts of your, I know we're jumping ahead here, but did parts of your previous life, the reading you did, the things you enjoyed, did they slowly begin to return to you?
Only parts of it. Actually, what I actually had to do as part of my remembering who I was I went back and visited my childhood home and tried to find as many people as I knew that I'd grown up with so they could tell me about myself. And so I could sort of fit it as, I guess this happened to me because you're telling me that it did, even though I don't really have a conscious memory of it.
Were you married then?
No, I wasn't.
You weren't. You're a single girl.
Yeah.
Was this here in Nevada?
No. This was in Marin County in California.
Marin County.
Yes.
How long were you to the world out? I mean, just unconscious before you came back around to some form of consciousness physically?
3 days.
3 days in a virtual coma?
Yes.
Did you at any time during those 3 days actually flatline?
According to the medical records, 5 times.
5 times?
Yeah, they kept losing me. They kept giving me an hour to live and then another hour to live. I was very critical for a long time.
Wow.
It was really horrific.
Do you think that you know when you flatlined?
Well, I think probably I don't have any conscious memory of it. As I said, for me, I came back to my body about 3 days later in time.
So you really think you were gone for that 3 days?
As far as I know, yes. Because there was basically I had the extended experience that I had, and then I was back in my body. But as far as time is concerned, 3 days had passed.
I've never really heard a story like yours before. This is
well, it's not over, Art.
I fully understand that. This is really something new to me.
And this isn't unusual.
It's not unusual, Doctor?
I believe it's unusual, but I do not believe that my experience is unique.
Obviously,
there's other people that have had experiences like mine. They just may not have ever told anybody about it.
Obviously, since that time, and so when did you begin talking about this?
Well, I spoke about it when I first came out and back to my body. I actually wasn't able to speak because I had a respirator in my face, but I started writing about it. And probably all the people in the hospital that I spoke to about it told me that I was just having intense hallucinations because of the fact that I was so incredibly injured.
Uh-huh.
And then I told kind of my immediate circle of friends at the time, but it was such a fantastic thing that I could really feel them drawing away from me because of it.
Have you otherwise recovered, or are there any other lingering physical problems?
Well, I have, in that arm, I have a condition that's called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, which means I'm in pain all the time. So that has really changed my life in a great deal of ways also, because when you experience pain, I think when you're that young, and I didn't really have any, precedent in my life for acute injury or acute pain. So it really served to kind of change my perspective.
I'll bet.
Especially about human beings and suffering.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Back to that most awful moment when out of the darkness, the light, a little pinprick of light, and then this horrid being with flames around it, a creature, I guess like a monster movie coming at you. At you.
At me, at an incredible rate of speed, too. Not slow, very quickly. It came toward me, and it was, there was nowhere to go in this black. I didn't think there was to move, I didn't think to run, because where was I going to go?
Yeah.
And so what I did was, this is where I really say that I had an awareness of my body, because I remember standing my ground, just sort of locking my knees and gritting my teeth and balling up my hands and going, okay, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And I closed my eyes as this creature, I could feel its hot breath on me at that point, right? And what it did was actually started to pass through my body. And I had an awareness of it passing actually very slowly through my body. And as it was passing through my body, it was laughing, and really gleefully laughing as it passed through me. And then it exited behind me with a pop. And then I started moving forward in the dark. And as I was rushing forward in the dark, there ended up being two more of these creatures that came at me. They were different colors from that one.
You can actually remember, in other words, you say you rushed forward, as in physically running?
No, more as in like whooshing, like flying.
I got you.
Yeah. But then I started moving forward. And then as in this infinite black, there was no sort of idea that I was moving toward anything. There was just black.
Yes.
And then another one of these creatures came, but I knew what to do about this one, and I just closed my eyes and it went through me. And then I kept going forward, and another one came, and these were both in different colors. They were still of the same aspect. They were still horrific looking, but they were just different colors than the original one. And so another one came through me, and it passed through me. And then I came to the entrance to a tunnel.
To a tunnel.
Mm-hmm. And the tunnel was made out of clouds. Or seemed to be made out of clouds. It was like gray storm clouds, different colors of storm clouds.
Right.
And it was probably, it's hard to describe, how large it was, because I didn't have any idea of perspective at that point. But what I can tell you is that it went up and then branched to the right and went around at such a turn that I actually couldn't see where the right branch of the tunnel was going. And on the sides of the tunnel were kind of doorways in the clouds. And there were several different ones of them. There wasn't just one or two. They went up kind of at irregularly spaced intervals up the tunnel on both sides.
Sounds almost like a maze.
It wasn't really a maze. It was more like a viewing gallery. If you were walking down a gallery, there were windows on both sides, but these happened to be doorways in the clouds.
I see.
So at this point, I looked down at myself, and I no longer had my body. My body had become a little blue star, and I was just a little star of light, a little blue star. And then as I noticed myself as a blue star, which seemed a perfectly normal thing for me to be in this context, I looked back up the tunnel, and I noticed that there were other little lights kind of moving around the tunnel up ahead of me. And it was far. It was a very vast distance. It wasn't as if I could just walk from one end of the tunnel very quickly if I had feet. But you know what I mean? It was far.
Yes.
And there were other little lights in the tunnel. Not a lot. I'd say maybe 6. And some of them were blue like me, and others were kind of orange-amber colored.
But you had sight, as we have sight now.
Yes, I was still seeing, and I was still aware, completely aware of myself. Do you know what I mean? I had a complete, utter personality of me.
Yes. You said obviously without feet, now you're not walking. Were you able to intentionally produce motion? Could you move yourself in a direction?
Yes. Well, it happened that as I was gazing in this tunnel going, okay, now I'm here, and now I'm a blue star. Two little other blue stars appeared on either side of me, and they pushed me into the tunnel. So then I started moving, kind of floating into the tunnel. And that all seemed very normal at the time. I know it sounds fantastic, but
now I know, but to you at that time, that
yes.
it was just what was happening and normal. Yeah,
right.
I do understand.
Yes. So as I was floating along, I observed that some of the doorways in the clouds were open, while others seemed to have been shut up. In terms of, they didn't have like a door with a handle or anything like that. There was just kind of a darker area, and you couldn't see in.
Right.
And some of the doors had characters above them, like, identifying what they were, but they weren't written or any characters that I'd ever seen. And sometimes that was very dim.
So you didn't really understand what those meant?
No, not at all. I just noticed, isn't that interesting that there were sort of something other than the clouds above the doors.
Did they look like Egyptian characters or Chinese or something indecipherable?
They were fantastic. They could have been any combination of those, Egypto-Phoenician, Chinese, science fiction, who knows,
But definitely not door number 1, 2, and 3.
No, nothing that was recognizable to me at all. And that not every door had that either, only some doors.
Right. Wow.
So anyway, the first doorway that I looked into looked like hell. There were people shrieking and screaming, and there were naked human beings strewn about, this horrid landscape with pools of bubbling excrement, and there's boulders, and animals were torturing people, and people were torturing each other, and, there were creatures with pitchforks.
Oh, my God.
And, erupting flame geysers, and it was the artist's classic depiction of hell.
So you had that much sensory perception. You not only saw, but you heard.
Well, not only that, it got worse in that as I got close to this doorway, I was in kind of the center of the hall, and I looked in and saw this scene, and I was like, whoa. And then I went toward this door. I kind of floated toward it, and there was a sucking sensation near this door, kind of like a whirlpool. And I got actually sucked into the hell. And I was kind of catapulted above it, and I was floating above this scene, which is one reason why I can describe it in such great detail, is because I was in there for a while, listening to it, looking at it, just, again, horrified and awed by what I was witnessing, because the scenes of torment were so incredibly imaginative and different. There was every imaginable thing going on in there, It was just that you can think of in terms of torture and human misery. It was happening in there.
And you were sucked into it.
And I was sucked into it, yeah.
But you were above it, seeing it.
I was above it, yes. I didn't have to. It wasn't as if anything was reaching for me. It was more as if I was observing it.
Good Lord. At this point, Sarah, at any point during all of this, didn't you begin to intellectualize your situation and ask yourself, where am I and what's happened to me? Or was it so natural that you just never went through that process?
Really, while this whole thing was happening, I never questioned why it was happening. I questioned what was happening in terms of, is this even possible at all? But I never questioned why it was happening. It just seemed as if it was something that I needed to see,
Or maybe you were familiar with it.
Pardon me?
Could it be possible that, Sarah, you were familiar with it because you'd been there before?
That's very possible. I have no idea. All I know is that it had a strange fascination to me in its horrible way.
But you weren't yet really part of it.
No, I didn't have to be part of it. I was floating above it. And then there was at one point where, kind of like when you're watching a horror movie and you decide, all right, that's enough of this.
Yes.
And I moved back. I said, all right, I'm leaving. And I went back toward the door, which was the doorway out into the tunnel was visible from everywhere in this landscape. No matter where you looked, you could always see the door, and the door was always open.
Well,
and you could see the tunnel the cloud of tunnel, and in there it seemed very calm, especially considering with the tumult that's all around.
Well, an obvious question is, though, those who were in that hell couldn't get to that door while you could.
I think my feeling about this is because of what happened next, which was actually I left without any difficulty. And as I was passing through the door, my thought at that point was that the people that were in this scene could leave it at any time. They just weren't aware that they could, because they were so caught up in their own idea that they needed to suffer.
Or perhaps...
And they say the door to hell is always open.
Yeah, perhaps they were keeping themselves there.
Yes, they were.
Have you seen the recent Rôbin Williams movie?
Yes, I did, on your recommendation, actually.
Really?
Yes.
It must have jolted you pretty hard.
It was interesting, but not exactly the same as my experience, only because he never had the idea of the tunnel, and the tunnel was so primary for mine.
Right.
But his idea of hell was tame for me.
Tame compared to what you saw?
Tame compared to what I saw, yes.
Well, all of this is confusing to the layman, because when you start talking about clouds and light and being a blue light, that begins to sound kind of spiritual on the good side, not...
I don't know if it was necessarily spiritual on the good side. I think, actually, it's more what form humans may take when they lose their body, or what form we perceive this particular experience in. I don't know, This is...
Well, in What Dreams May Come and some other motion pictures that have been produced, there is the concept that people essentially sentence themselves to hell.
Yes, and that's what I think, too. I think so, definitely, from the experience that I had, that those people had sentenced themselves.
All right,
that's what I've gotten from all of my research also, Art.
Yeah.
So you left there on your own. You got out.
I felt really lucky, too, because I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to get out because that sucking sensation had been so strong coming in. And, even as I was leaving, I could sort of feel the energy kind of pouring back in, sort of, if anything else unwary kind of came along, it was also going to get sucked in, So it was pretty interesting in that respect. And then I was back in the tunnel.
Back in the tunnel of clouds and doors.
Right, tunnel of clouds and doors.
Okay.
So I decided I was going to keep going up the tunnel. And so the next world that I looked into, which was, I don't remember if it was exactly the one right next to the hell, but the next door that I looked in that I have a conscious memory of was also a kind of hell. It was a kind of a completely yellow landscape that was flat. And there were people, and they were just walking, and they had their heads down, and they were totally depressed and totally self-absorbed in this utter miserable state of mind, and they walked past each other, and they walked next to each other, and they were totally oblivious that anybody else was there, and that was all that was happening, except there was a sun in the sky that would cast incredibly long shadows of these people across the landscape. And again, there was this sense here, again, of another kind of misery. It wasn't as graphic.
Not as torturous.
No, but it was, in certain levels, it was worse, because these people were completely isolated and alone. And in their isolation and in their loneliness, they were utterly lost and miserable.
Oh, my God.
Oh, that's what I thought, too. When I looked in that world, I was like, oh, my God.
All right, Sarah.
That one I didn't have to go into, though. That one I managed to, there was no sucking sensation at that door. I just looked at it.
You looked at it
and said, wow.
I'm caught up in, I've never heard anything as detailed as this in my life from somebody like you, ever.
Well, it really absolutely, utterly changed my life forever, and it has been the pivotal event in my existence ever since then. And one of the reasons why I want to communicate it is so that I can move forward with this and join with other people in sort of celebrating this event, so that it no longer is something that is, just my own, and, you know, it's just very, it takes a lot of energy, and especially with something like this where you don't have any precedent in your existence for such a thing. How do you fit that back into an ordinary reality when you return to it?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I haven't done a very good job with that.
All right. Well, let's finish it. You came out of this second room where people were on a yellow floor, sort of.
Yes.
In just sort of a horribly depressed state, and you sort of looked in that one and didn't spend much time. Said, let's.
No, I just felt a great deal of compassion for these people again, because it seemed again like they were choosing this state.
Yeah. Like
they didn't have any idea that this was not what they had to be at all. But unfortunately, they didn't have any idea of that. All they knew is that this is what it was. Mm-hmm. And just to see all these different human beings just passing each other by like ships in the night and having no idea that anybody else was there was just so isolating and lonely.
Other than that, those creatures, which more than noticed you, came after you, did anybody in any one of these rooms, were they aware you were there, do you think?
No, it was more like looking in an aquarium, kind of like that idea.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Because in both cases, the tunnel was kind of above these landscapes, so it was very much a kind of a looking down on them.
I've got you.
Okay.
Then what?
Well, then I decided to keep continuing up the tunnel, and the next world that made any sort of impression on me was kind of a very different one in the aspect of it was the most beautiful thing that I'd ever seen. And in that way, the Rôbin Williams film touched me very deeply because the kind of color that he had there and the beautiful waterfalls and bridges and fountains, and it was sparkling and iridescent and welcoming, and I could hear the sounds of birds and all this other thing going on in there, and it was like, oh boy, well, I definitely want to go in there.
By the way, folks, it's called What Dreams May Come.
Yes, it was wonderful. But this world, later, in fact, several years later, after I had this experience, I saw the paintings of an artist named Gilbert Williams, and this world was very much like his paintings, if you're familiar with his work at all.
I'm not.
Okay. But anyway, it was luminescent. Everything was lit from within and sparkling and living and gorgeous. And it was very interesting because as I went toward this world, of course I wanted to go in there. I was like, oh, yeah. As I started to pass through the doorway, it was as if my little star nose got stuck against a piece of plastic wrap, and I couldn't go any further in to this world.
Oh.
And a voice, kind of almost as if I touched a doorbell, a voice said, you do not have the information to enter this world. And I was terribly disappointed, but I thought, okay, well, what can I do? You know, I can't go any further. In fact, I remember I kind of tried to push through this transparent covering over this world,
right,
but it didn't work. I didn't go in.
You don't have the information
to enter this world, yes. And I thought, well, okay. And I thought to myself, well, I'm certainly going to get the information wherever somehow I will get the information to enter that world. But that was a big disappointment for me.
Right.
So at that point, I was kind of very much near the end of the tunnel in terms of where it branched to the right.
Okay.
And so as in my little star self, I turned around, and there, in this right branching, was a big yellow and white light that was very bright and intense and beautiful and wonderful. So I decided, okay, well, may as well go into the light. So I went into the light, and I'm in the light, and I feel this incredible feeling of joy and happiness and bliss, and I notice that that's the only thing that I can feel. There's nothing else going on there but joy and happiness and bliss and celestial, harmony, and it was overwhelming. And I said to the light, I said, I'm here. And the light said, in this kind of big voice, it said, great,
Great.
And then, yeah, it said, great, and then I kind of I kind of gave myself up to the light. I merged with it. I myself became nothing but eternal joy and bliss and happiness. And I kind of floated in this state for quite some time. And in this state, I lost my fear of death. And I learned a lot of things that are all kind of personal truths for me about myself in this state of joy and bliss. And this lasted for an unknown period of time. And then...
Again, let me ask you, were you in that state? I've experienced, Sarah, something like that in not an NDE, but an out-of-body experience I had, just instantaneously. So I know just a little tiny bit about it.
Yes.
Could you think, could you intellectualize, obviously something was going on because you were recognizing these things about yourself. So
yes.
So you had some sort of awareness.
Yes, it was definitely a learning state and a healing state at the same time. But I was aware of myself. Again, I never lost my awareness of who I was, ever.
Okay.
No matter what was happening, even in the state of utter joy and bliss. I was in utter joy and bliss, and yet the joy and bliss was also outside me and happening around me. And at one point, to be perfectly honest with you, it got kind of dull. And so I decided that I was going to leave this place of joy and bliss. And so I said to the light, I said, "I'm leaving." And the light said, "Great." And I thought, okay.
You know, so far I'm right with you, because the feeling of eternal joy and bliss would, after a while, I suppose, sort of.
And I guess that sounds kind of sacrilegious.
It does, but it would be almost boring. In other words, you tire of it.
I did. I tired of it because, in certain levels, it was exhausting because it was never ending.
Yeah.
You know, there was nothing but that. There was no other emotion expressed. It was always joy and bliss.
So the light
it was
said,
very wonderful.
So the light
said, very wonderful.
The light said, "Great."
Yeah. So, and I had an idea that it doesn't matter on a personal level. You know, it didn't matter if I was there or if I wasn't there. This light was always going to be in eternal joy and bliss.
You were welcome to come, welcome to go.
Exactly. And so that was just wonderful. So, and then, you know, and I remember thinking, well, okay, well, all right, well, I'm leaving now. And I kind of went rather quickly back down the tunnel, and I paused. This is now we're kind of near the end of this here.
Okay.
This is my last little experience. But there was a doorway near the end of the tunnel that was actually near the entrance where I came in. And this doorway looked out onto space. And there were galaxies and stars and planets, and it was utterly silent and utterly serene, and seemed, you know, if you could go out and float on that forever and be kind of numbly happy pretty much eternally. And there's also a sense of adventure too, though. Like if you went out there, you'd become like a voyager in the galaxy.
Right.
And I kind of hovered on this doorway. And another little being came up and started talking to me about what my options were at this point. And through the opening of the doorway, I could hear voices that were saying, "Come back, Sarah. You know, what about Zane?" which is my son's name. And I got very annoyed with them because I thought, why are they bothering me about my son? Of course, I'm aware that I'm going to be returning to my son and my body. But I could hear them kind of clamoring through the doorway. And so I spoke with this little other being at this doorway, and we were talking, and suddenly it was kind of like the doorbell with the other world, where a voice said, "If you pass through this door, you can't come back." And I thought, okay, well, I really don't want to go out there right now. And so I plopped myself back through the door where I came, and suddenly I was back in my body, and I was in a really brightly lit hospital bed, and there were all these tubes sticking into me, and I had a respirator in my face, and my body was humming with power. It was just full of electricity, but I couldn't move it at all because at that point I was pretty much completely paralyzed. And yet also, you know, I was full of joy. I had no fear of death. I had all this wonderful truth about myself, and I couldn't move, and I couldn't communicate it to anyone at all.
You couldn't even write then?
Oh, no, and I actually, at that point, it seemed like being in the hospital bed and being in my body and being so heavy was the abnormal part, do you know?
Yes, I
That
do.
was a jolt, and I really didn't want to be there for a moment. But then I settled into the fact that, oh, well, here I was. And then as the feeling of electricity faded, then I got the wonderful feeling of pain. So I knew I was back in my body because it hurt. And it's understandable considering the extent of my injury.
How long was it before you were able to either write or talk?
Talking took a month.
A month?
Because I was on the respirator for almost that whole month because my lungs had really been pretty badly damaged.
When you could talk, you began to communicate, I'm sure, didn't you? What happened to you?
I did, and the health practitioners who were wonderful in terms of saving my life were very, they were upset by what I was saying. They didn't really, they told me basically that the experience that I had was a result of the hallucinations from the fact that I'd been so badly hurt, and that none of what I had experienced was real.
They told you that?
Yes. And I think that they were doing the best that they could in terms of the context of what they knew. You know, this is a fantastic occurrence. They had a job to do, which was to keep me alive, and that's more what they were concentrating on, other than trying to, you know, fit what happened to me into the context of something that they knew. Since it was something outside what they knew, I don't really think they knew what to do with it.
There would be no way for you to correlate the events that you went through to the 5 times that you flatlined, would there? In other words, there would be...
In terms of time?
Or even synchronicity. In other words, you can't put together in your mind...
No, like if each time I flatlined, I might have been in one of those different worlds or something like that.
Sure.
It would be it'd be wonderful to say that happened.
But you don't know that to be true.
I can't honestly say that. All I can honestly say is that I know they lost me, and I know that this experience was obviously extended over a long period of time because 3 days had passed before I returned to my body. And by then my parents were there, and I don't remember actually if I communicated much to them at all about it. I know I told my close circle of friends, but again, I met with a great deal of kind of skepticism. And again, everyone was kind of humoring me because I was so injured. So I really shut up about it. And I shut up about it really until I came here to Las Vegas and found the little advertisement that Trish had put in one of the papers saying that she had a support group that she was creating for people with near-death experience. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to other people who've had this experience, and then I'm not going to feel so alone and frightened and strange.
Have you met in the group or anywhere else anybody who had the experience you had?
I haven't met anybody who's had the same experience that I've had, but I've met other people who have had the same experience in terms of their lives have been transformed in the same way that mine was by the experience that they had.
And how is your life now different?
Well, the biggest thing that I learned from that is that I lost my fear of death. I lost any fear that I have of the fact that I will lose, upon death, my awareness of who I am.
Yeah. You know,
that is such a comfort.
Daniel Brinkley tells me the same thing all the time. I mean, he just says, I'm not afraid.
I'm not. No, it's not that I necessarily want to go quickly into that experience again, okay?
Right.
But the point is, when it comes, I have an acceptance of it that I wish I could communicate to other people because it is such a joy. Because nothing in my ordinary life now, no matter how hard it gets, can really shake my idea of who I am. And I know that even death will not dissolve my awareness of who I am. And I think that is one of the biggest things that people worry about when they die. They feel like they're going to disintegrate and disappear.
Cease to exist.
And
Blackness.
that doesn't happen. I don't believe it happens at all.
Your
I think actually you have that death is a wonderful adventure, if you'll let it be. You know, I think that was one of the things about my experience is that death can also have some horrific aspects to it if that's your choice. But there's certainly many other avenues of death to explore.
Sarah,
yes.
Why do you think that the horrific aspects of that were your choice?
In my case?
Yes.
I think that they represented fear that I had of dying, because I did have a great fear of dying. I was very kind of morbid as a child. I liked horror movies and ghost stories and all that stuff, and I loved scaring myself. But I was really very afraid of death, and also really very ignorant of death. I really knew nothing about it. No one in my immediate circle of family had really died where I actually had a good experience of death. You know, I was ignorant of death, and I was afraid of death. And I think my horrific aspects of my near-death experience represented those things in myself.
Dannion Brinkley is now compelled to go to hospices and to help people die.
Yes, that was my first thing, too. The only reason why it never happened was because I was afraid that I would go and present myself to medical practitioners and they would turn me away as a lunatic.
Well, we've got a couple that didn't do that here on the phone. Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. I have never heard a story ever like yours, and it was remarkable.